Hey folks, thanks for joining us to talk about some utility news today. I assume you're a utility wonk, otherwise there's no way you would have ever found Public Power Underground. And if you are, then I think that today's stories are gonna resonate with you because if you've been involved in the industry, you've probably gotten the feeling that the status quo is probably the one thing that's not going to keep happening in the future. And we got a slate of stories and hot takes that I think reinforce that. And I think that that notion is unsettling and exciting at the same time. One of the things you'll hear about me in a few minutes is I started in this industry as a meter reader for Portland General Electric. And when I got that job, the reason I wanted that job is so that I could hopefully be where I am now, working on all these things that are so difficult and so exciting, because I thought that this was an amazing space to work in. And I think that that's true. That being said, the reason a lot of these things are changing is because things are getting difficult, right? Things are hard. And the stories today, I think, will show that. And hopefully the discussion will help us think about things in a way that we can kind of balance two of what I think are the most amazing things about this industry. One is the innovation, because the fact that we have this amazing utility industry, I think, is really impressive. The other is our really effective planning and the way that we can be conservative in a way that really makes things work. And I think that for that reason, as an industry, we were able to build the largest engineering marvel in the history of humanity and keep it going for decades and decades and decades and decades. So I'm excited to see how we continue to work through all these things. We're going to talk about a lot of external factors, including wildfire and the way that climate change is manifesting, and how that leads to everybody talking about decarbonizing the energy supply. But what does that mean in terms of reliability? What does that mean in terms of energy security? And what does that mean in terms of the investments you'd have to make to actually make things work? And also just talk about our relationship with electricity. So when we're talking about all that, I hope that there's a level of excitement for a lot of people to balance out all of the sort of doom and gloom that I think tends to be an easy place to go to when you think about all this change. I think that we're in the middle of doing a lot of things that are really gonna help address these issues. And I think that a lot of these issues are some of the, but like they're at the nexus of some of the most important things that are changing in our society. And so with that, I hope we can work together. I hope we can talk together about how to make things a little bit better. But in the meantime, let's talk about some news and stuff.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the...
Welcome to Public Power Underground, Public Power's premier infotainment program that covers public power and public power adjacent news from a power department's perspective. Also, we focus on alliteration. I'm Russ Mantifel, the acting director of market initiatives for BPA, former acting manager of the Slice product, and among other things, a former meter reader for PGE, and today's celebrity guest host, the Daniel LaRusso of Public Power.
The editor of California Energy Markets and this week's podcast ambassador for News Data.
I'm the creative director of Public Power Underground, manager of Gladstone PUD's power department, and producer, not producer for today's recording. I left that in from last week. I'm just the manager of the power department. Yes, take it away, Ludgie.
And this is Ludgie Gelin, data specialist for Gladstone PUD and today's producer.
Thanks for being the producer today, Ludgie. I don't have to do it. Russ, where's the headband? The Danny LaRusso of Public Power.
Yeah, I know. I left you. I find all sorts of ways to disappoint people, and the headband and the bandana is one of them. But I've cut my hair in the last month or so. It still is pretty long, actually, but the bandana, though it became a calling card of mine, really was a utilitarian thing, which I think that as Americans, we should recognize utilitarian benefits of a bandana, but yeah, I don't rock the bandana so much anymore, but I hope the joke still works.
Yeah, it worked for me.
All right.
Well, so I was curious in your intro. I actually didn't know what to put for your permanent placement. Like, what are you if all of the actings fall away? What are you?
I think I would be an EIM project manager.
Okay, so that was like a permanent role.
I think that was the permanent role. It'd be interesting exactly what that would mean at this point in time. Yeah, I think that's what I would revert to, but I'm not 100% sure, honest. I think, yeah.
It's great. You're confident in yourself. You know that you're going to succeed no matter what you're doing.
Everybody should bet on themselves, right?
That's right. Bet on yourself. Okay, this is fun. Jason, can you hear us? You're coming through your phone's internet. Are you there? No, I don't know that we got Jason.
A little bit of a lag.
Yeah, it's a lot of a lag.
Maybe should I come back with audio only?
Yeah, why don't you come back with audio only?
Okay.
Jason is going to rejoin us with audio only. We're going to carry this today, Russ.
Okay.
Okay.
This is season 4, episode 5. On today's recording, we discuss all sorts of energy news, including electric utilities expanding broadband, NARUC, the council's power plan, a garbage story, Arin reports of Paul reporting, and a bunch of witty banter in between.
You know what? I got to edit these after we actually pick our stories. None of the, like 2 of these things apply. It's my fault. That's what happens. Russ, you did a great job in your monologue actually talking about what we're going to talk about.
So, yeah, make do with it what you will. So
yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine.
Jason here.
Yeah.
All right. Before we get started, Jason is going to read a quick word from our presenting sponsor.
The presenting sponsor of Public Power Underground is the Energy Authority. The Energy Authority is a nonprofit energy portfolio management company owned by public power entities like us. TEA's mission is to help clients maximize the value of their assets and meet their power supply goals. TEA does this by providing expertise in energy trading, advanced analytics, renewable solutions, and a whole lot more. Over 60 public power utilities have partnered with TEA to tackle their energy future. So if you are looking for an energy authority to partner with in navigating the uncertain future of our industry, visit TEAINC.org to learn more. That's TEAINC.org. The Energy Authority. They're as underground as it gets.
There we go. We're starting this week, as is our wont, checking in on power market indicators in the Northwest with our first segment, Arin Reports, with Paul reporting.
Russ, this is my first time doing Arin Reports. This is my first time reading it. I'm under a lot of pressure. I hope you will be my emotional support here.
You look like you're under a lot of pressure. I just want you to know that.
I'm very nervous. If Arin listens to this, I don't want her to be disappointed. Okay. This is Arin Reports with Paul reporting, where we try to get up to speed on Northwest market indicators for February 21st, 2022. I'm Paul Dockery, and I've got your market update for the week. October through September flows at the Dalles for watt year 2022 are currently forecast to be 93% of normal, and April through September is at 94%. That is a big drop from last time reported on Public Power Underground. Outflow at the Dalles peaked over the past week at 220 kCF on February 18th. Day-ending elevation at Grand Coulee yesterday was 1,266 feet, and peak outflow this past week was 179 kCFS on February 16th. Spot market power in the Northwest for delivery today is at $27.75, with gas at $4.15 per MMBTU, translating to a spark spread of 0, no spark spread, and a heat rate of 6,700. Russ, we're just gonna do this live. What does it mean when a spark spread is 0 at a heat rate of 6,700? Does that mean that the indicator for how you calculate spark spread is exactly the heat rate of 6,700?
I think that's what it means, but I might not. I think Arin would be the one to ask.
Yeah, we'll have to get Arin on here next time and talk about that, or somebody from TEA, one of our sponsors.
It's
in the term markets,
really
go ahead.
Meaningful. And,
it does.
Yeah.
It seems incredibly meaningful. In term markets, balance of the month for February heavy load at Mid-C is trading at $45.05 per megawatt hour. Mid-C heavy load for March is at $33. March gas at Sumas is trading at $4.07, translating to a heat rate of 8,100 BTU per kilowatt hour. August power at Mid-C is trading at $163 per megawatt hour, with Sumas gas at $4.88, translating to a heat rate of over 33,400. Wowza! Checking in on Entergy's aggregated basin data for snow in the region, the snow water equivalent for BC Hydro Generation Basin is 1,019% of normal. For Mid-C, it's 92% of normal. And aggregating all the snow in the Columbia River Basin that'll flow through Bonneville Dam, they estimate there is 104% of normal snow blanket. Spending a beat at Bonneville's Balancing Authority. Peak load this past week was at 8,152, February 17th at 7:30 a.m. During load's peak, hydro generation was 12,354. If you just flip that and it was 12,345, could you have done that, Russ? That would have been really cool. It would have been
I'll call
cool.
him next. Yeah.
Okay. Wind gen was 2,211. Conventional units were at 419, and nuclear was a steady 1,161. All units in megawatts. And so for November, December, January period sits at -1 Oceanic Nino Index. The multivariate ENSO index for December, January is -1.02. And the SST Consolidated Nino forecast indicates that La Nina conditions are likely to continue through spring 2022. This week in NOAA climate forecast, the 6 to 10 day outlook has temperature ranging from above to below normal. It's all over the place. The precipitation is expected to be below normal for most of the region. The 30 and 90 day outlooks indicate temperatures probably below normal for almost the entire region and above normal precipitation for the normal region, which are normal La Nina indicators. But we keep seeing in the near term range, there's not this weather that is not consistent with what we expect out of a La Nina. The long term forecasts keep expecting that La Nina to have an impact on our weather systems for the future. Special thanks to Entergy for letting us use their dashboards, and thanks to Ludgie for compiling this week's report. That's all we've got for this update.
And I think my hottest take on that is that I woke up to snow this morning, and that's probably a signal for things that are going to happen.
You think it's a signal or just some noise?
Well, I don't know. I wonder if people thought it was a signal because the day ahead trading was pretty high before, right? And I think that we came out of a pretty temperate period, and it's pretty cold and rainy and somewhat snowing the last couple of days.
Yeah, a story that we are not covering, but I did cross the Entergy Twitter panel was it was like a pun on polar, like what do you call it when you jump into a polar plunge?
Polar plunge.
It was like the northern part of the U.S. is doing an involuntary polar plunge. It was a terrible headline. I didn't click on it. I don't respect that. I don't respect it.
Yeah.
This is maybe too punny for me.
They're asking us to meet us more than halfway. In that situation.
Yeah, but there's an incoming cold into the northern part of the entire U.S.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anything for you, Jason, on what's going on in the markets?
I haven't seen much in markets. We're due for snow here too, here in Nevada City and up on the mountain, about a foot. The snowpack has been really depleted since our big storm in mid-January, so it's been very concerning. But really happy to see some activity on that. We've got about another 5 weeks to turn things around. Otherwise, it's going to be a really nasty fire season.
Yeah. It's nice to see some snow. Nice to see some water on the mountains.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Take it away, Russ.
Okay. Thanks for the report, Paul. Next up is our weekly walk through public power and public power adjacent news in a segment we like to call Public Power Desktop. Ludgie, give us a typewriter, please, and take it away, Jason.
Okay, Wednesday, February 16th, Energy News Digest from a friend of the underground, Joel Meyer, covered a bunch of great broadband news that got us excited. Featured in the Energy News Digest was coverage of a roundtable at Mason PUD #3 about rural broadband. Included in the roundtable was the Undersecretary for Rural Development for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Xochitl Torres Small. That first name is spelled Xochitl. Hopefully I was close. Undersecretary Small states on the video that, quote, they're working hard to make sure that no matter where you live, you have access to good, reliable internet, unquote. That's kind of ironic today for me. Also shared in NWPPA's Energy News Digest last week was a story on Fierce Telecom's website on how rural electric co-ops are the fastest growing group of broadband providers. National Rural Electric Cooperative Association CEO Jim Matheson told Fierce that, quote, co-ops are uniquely positioned to deliver service to parts of the country that big incumbents either can't or don't want to reach. That's in part because they already have a deep relationship with their customer owners and because they're nonprofits, which tend to take a longer-term view of infrastructure investments since they're not under pressure from shareholders to generate short-term returns. But it's also because many co-ops already have middle mile fiber assets they can tap for last mile expansions to deliver retail broadband, unquote. For more, you should definitely subscribe to NWPPA's Energy News Digest. The links to the articles will be in the show notes.
Jason and Russ, you both subscribe to the Energy News Digest, right?
I do not actually.
What?
Now,
Yeah, I will. I already decided to change that.
Yeah,
Right.
if you need me to forward it to you, Joel makes it pretty easy. If you have one of the editions, you can click, and it's super easy. I'll forward it on to you, Russ. Jason, you're on it, right?
I'll look into it.
You aren't either?
No.
Oh,
Okay, this is value I am providing to you. As everybody knows, I am deeply invested in rural broadband. It's less frustrating to me now because I come to work in Clatskanie County PUD's office, which has good internet. But at home, I do not have good internet. I have DSL that is very susceptible to my neighbors' streaming stuff. So I'm very much watching this. Also, I wanted to note on this story, I talked to Bear Prairie about what they're doing in their service territory with like fiber expansion and fiber to homes, that last foot fiber. And I need to get him on here because they're doing some innovative stuff there at Idaho Falls.
Idaho Falls. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear it. And I think I like these stories. Not talked about a whole bunch, but I think that it is really analogous to the way all of our entities were created, right? Almost, over the last 30, 40, 75 years, et cetera, which is finding the best way to provide services that have become essential for people, right? And so we're going through a lot of the same things with a different service, and so good to see focus on it. And I think it seems like there's just a really wide disparity as well, because a lot of the backbone of this infrastructure is there, and I'll probably get the place wrong, but I remember before I was able to get gigabit internet, I knew like people I worked at. I think Chelan had it, right? Because they have all of this infrastructure for the electric system that requires or relies on fiber optic, and so I don't know what they did to make that happen, but Wenatchee, they were able to get gigabit internet way before I was in North Portland. But at the same time, like 5 years ago, we were trying to get internet at my wife's grandmother's place in Odell, Oregon, which is in the Hood River Electric Co-op. And they wanted to do things, but it's just tough, right? Like they hadn't had a chance to make those investments yet. And so you're trying like all these sort of like satellite, or like wearing a tinfoil hat, like whatever you can do to try to get enough internet to make things work. And getting everybody like on an equal footing, or like a roughly equal footing, I think is super important. So like I like those stories.
Yeah. What about you, Jason? You're experiencing some data issues today.
Yeah, our area can be sketchy. It's just the way it is. Pretty rural area here in Nevada City. And, as far as 5G, we had resistance to 5G from our local elected officials for various reasons, conspiratorial reasons. So yeah, definitely an issue. Happy to see people working on it.
So in it's Nevada City, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So do you have broadband to Nevada City, or is it DSL?
I don't. It's limited. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's limited.
Yeah. And because your home is then outside in Nevada City, do you have DSL at your home, or are you off cell service
Right.
for internet?
Well, this is interesting. Where I live,
I know, that's why I asked. I knew it would be interesting.
I have no phone, or I have no mobile phone access at all up in the mountains.
Do you have a desk phone?
I'd have to go knock on the main house. Yeah, it's crazy, but
You're a news reporter that does not have a phone at his house.
yes. Yeah.
What?
But
And
you know
live in a
what?
situation where there's such a thing as the main house.
You're right. Yeah.
That's anachronistic. I like that.
It is. It's an off the grid property. I've talked about this before.
Nice.
But,
I didn't heard that. That's exciting. All right.
I guess I have some like preconceived bias that even an off the grid property probably has like phones. No, apparently not.
Yeah, not on my setup. And yeah, you know what? I really recommend not having internet at home. I really do,
I
because
believe that.
I'm
Yeah.
able to turn off. I pick up books. I do other things, and you know, I'm online 10 hours a day in my office, so I really treasure my quiet time up there. So yeah.
No,
What can I say?
I'm learning so much about you every time we record an episode.
I'm the mountain man.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Like it.
remote. It's remote where I live. So that's just the way it goes. Yep.
Okay, take it away. You ready, Russ?
Okay, Ludgie, we're ready for the typewriter. Well done. All right.
Leadership of the California Independent System Operator, which administers the Western Energy Imbalance Market, as well as the EIM governing body, approved on February 9th, Phase 1 of the Resource Sufficiency Test Rule changes. The proposal will be submitted to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission for approval. The resource sufficiency test is designed to prevent balancing areas leaning on others, a situation that could arise when a BA does not have sufficient capacity to meet its own demand, requiring it to rely on EIM transfers. The proposed new rules include changes to the capacity test to more accurately count a balancing authority's available supply, changes to the flexible ramping test, which measures a BA's ramping capability, and more accurate counting of imports and exports. The rules did not pass without controversy. Some current and future EIM participants, such as the Bonneville Power Administration, say the new rules regarding the resource sufficiency test need more work because of certain inaccuracies. One problem noted in the story is that current calculations of historic net load uncertainty and intertie deviations have been determined to provide inaccurate indicators of future uncertainty. The news was covered by the Underground's own Jason Fordney in the February 11th edition of California Energy Markets, who we have on the pod. And Russell Mantifel is the EIM project manager for Bonneville, which may have some insights into this topic. Russ, what do you got for
I think I'm in an emeritus position in regards to that. Yeah, this is like on it. So speaking for myself here, right? This issue is at once just one of the most kind of esoteric, arcane things, but at the same time, one of the most just like basic and like easy to understand issues. It's like it's tough. So the actual proposals, right? Like, there are parts of it I know really well, other parts I don't know really well, which is like, it is so esoteric that even within this one proposal, right, like it's tough to be like really an expert on the whole thing. And yeah, Bonneville submitted comments. We were the only ones that submitted comments, and I'd encourage people to read everybody's. And the discussion at the board meeting was really interesting as well. You don't always get a lot of really substantive discussion with board members, but some of the CAISO board members like really had had read through all the comments, read through the proposal, and I really appreciated that conversation. I think that with resource sufficiency, I just think that the whole region has more work to do, and I think we're doing a lot of that work on trusting that everybody is going about running their business in a way that's fair and makes sense, right? And I think that, like I said in my opening and in all of these, everything is changing so much and everybody's responding to it so differently that it's easy to get caught up in like these resource efficiency comments. And yeah, everything could be better. And I encourage people to look at those comments. But I think at the base of this is, it's not just resource efficiency, it's resource adequacy, it's integrated resource planning. I think that there's just a general concern in the whole industry that people don't know how to make sure that everybody's being fair and responsible in the way that they're setting up. And so yeah, these things are really interesting. And I look to stuff like resource adequacy, for example, to hopefully get us off center on some of these topics.
Oh,
Start, because by the time you get to the hour, a lot,
it's all baked in.
It's all, yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Like you want people to show up, set up, right? But if you don't have it, you don't have it. And so I think that we kind of try to use a pretty small lever on a pretty big issue with some of this stuff. And I hope that I'm encouraged by all the resource adequacy discussions in WEC and in CAISO, because I think that's kind of the basis, so that when you get to the hour, I don't know, if you're not trying to solve like a different problem, which I sometimes worry it's the case with like getting like some of the things that end up being controversial with resource efficiency.
Like you frame, like you're solving a different problem, and that you're using this really tiny lever to try to solve resource adequacy things that happen. That's kind of my interpretation of the way you're thinking about it. Interesting. Jason, anything from reporting on the article you wanted to draw out from either your article or Russ's comments?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting to hear your comments there on the ground with that, Russ. BPA did support this, but is urging CAISO to move more quickly with a phase 1B rather than waiting for phase 2. And I think you're right, the CAISO board is really coming up to speed on it. It is pretty complicated. And you might know better than I, but there was issues with hydro plants failing this test. It has been some time which I've heard about that, but have you heard that still being an issue, where even though they were pretty much, weren't leaning on other BAs, that there was issues with hydro because various factors, control factors that they have. But have you heard?
Yeah, and I'm not 100% up on all that, but I think that one of the issues that you end up running into is what to give people credit for, what to give utility a credit for. And you can see that, and I think in several people's comments, that from the CAISO's perspective, they're soup to nuts, like working on the whole thing. But by the time they get there, they've got visibility about exactly how they got there. And it's natural that they wouldn't have the same visibility for every other single entity, right? And so I think that there is a risk that maybe outside of the CAISO, folks might not, like some resources might not, it might be tough for some resources to get like similar treatment, which we should work on that. We should keep working on this. And I'm glad that they're moving forward. With this. And I'm glad that they still are taking really seriously moving on to the next step and continuing to fix these issues. But I think that also goes back to, hopefully we can more fundamentally create like a level playing field, or faith that people are on a level playing field, so that it's easier to come up with rules that sort of apply equally to everybody. Like, I think it's understandable why there's some of these, like some of these are contentious, right? Like that kind of makes sense. It'd be more surprising if everything just worked super easily when you're trying to, dovetail all these really, really different paradigms in terms of markets and also just the way utilities operate. So maybe that's a long-winded question to say, like, yeah, that's a possibility. I'm glad we're working through it. And, I think that eventually we'll probably get there, but this is both important, but it's also not the whole issue, essentially.
And I see phase 2 due to kick off in July, so there'll be a lot more to come on this one for sure. The Wall Street Journal published a long-form article by Catherine Blunt on February 18th on the increased amount of outages for electric service, titled, quote, "America's grid is increasingly unreliable," unquote. Quoting from the lead, quote, "Large sustained outages have occurred with increasing frequency in the US over the past 2 decades, according to a Wall Street Journal review of federal data. In 2000, there were fewer than 24 major disruptions, the data shows. In 2020, the number surpassed 180, unquote. A utility executive was quoted in the piece regarding power planning. Quote, "We used to do resource planning on a spreadsheet. It used to be very simple. The math is just astronomically more complicated today," unquote. The bulk of the article is spent focused on power supply disruptions, but there are portions that touch on the increased stress and strain to poles and wires. It also includes some great infographics. We can't hope to summarize it properly and simply encourage electric utility enthusiasts to read it, since a long-form article in the Wall Street Journal on the topic will likely turn into comments from electric utility skeptics that may end up coming to you. And Russ, do you have any thoughts on that?
My first thought, Ludgie, if you can scroll up to the top. Boy, I want that map, right? Like that image, or yeah, like that image is just, especially with the flickering, is just really, you don't even need the story at the point where you've got that. I think you come up with the image first, and then you're like, we got to write a story about this.
I'm a little jealous of that.
Very
image.
East Coast biased, though. That image is very East Coast biased.
Yeah,
very East Coast biased on that red. Like that. We should definitely get one made. People still make those, right? What do you call them? Neon lights, neon signs. Yeah, we could get that neon sign made.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the least. I feel like I've just read a million stories like this, and I probably feel that way because I'm a utility industry wonk. So like I'm looking out for these stories, and I assume they're using like EIA data for the outages. Is that, did they say, or?
Yeah, I think they noted in the article, like they're using the SAIDI and SAFE that we all report.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if they're, I worry they're playing it a little fast and loose with this, with some of the information. And
I think they're playing a little fast and loose with the narrative.
Yeah, and because even the information they're talking about really talked a lot about what sounded like distribution and delivery issues, when I think the narrative, or what they're trying to convey, is that this is a sort of decarbonization problem, which that's a legitimate art, like that's a real question, like that's a real issue. But they seem to discuss is maybe a lack of investment or lack of innovation or in the last mile sort of thing in distribution, which I definitively don't work on at Bonneville Power. So I'm curious, Paul Dockery, if you've got any hot takes on that.
Jason came off mute, and since we don't have his visual, we got to let him go because.
Yeah, it's usually a distribution level problem, right? It's funny. I just got into quite a debate on Twitter about this.
I saw it.
Did you?
Yeah, I did. I love the Twitter spats. It's great.
Yeah, I came under a little bit of fire. Being in California, I obviously focused on California. I'm a little astounded out here at how unreliable our grid is. In fact, I just wrote up the Citizen Utility Board latest utility ranking. California came in 24th overall, but however, California came in 51st place on average time to restore power per customer with major event days. That's because we have so many long duration outages. A big one is PSPS, which really skews that because we have a lot of long outages. But we also had the August 2020 outages. And, you know, I've sort of been a little bit accused of blaming decarbonization. I do think, you know, the ramping issue is the reason we have problems in California. It's very simple. The sun goes down, we don't have the generation or imports that we need. Imports are shrinking. So, and there's other factors. We dug up a document at the CPUC from 2012 where they actually told PG&E, go ahead and go light on inspecting your lines because fires don't happen in Northern California. That was, you know, 10 years ago. Climate change does play a role, but I think slapping climate change on as a cause of these outages is a little, you know, a little wrong. There's definite planning problems and capacity problems, and I don't see them getting much better. California scored 36 overall on reliability on this, and I feel like a state with our number of expertise and wealth here that we should be doing better.
Yeah, one of the things in these type of stories, and Russ, you spoke to, they do happen a lot, that often the narrative components get like confused, like because there are, I think narratively and in people's intuition, the power supply concerns are very obvious, right? And Russ, you spoke to it, like these are legitimate things that maybe we should be thinking about in our planning horizon, but they actually haven't caused much. Like there haven't been many power supply issues, and the ones that do get a lot of press. But as the article notes, the largest cause of outages in the U.S. is distribution. It's, you know, it's the tree hitting a wire. Like that is actually how people perceive. And they're in this article, I think kind of it uses data from one as to talk about, be a cause to talk about the other. And similar with electrification, like electrification is a good thing to be thinking about on a planning horizon, using historic data as a reason to then talk about your electrification being a risk for the future. I think it grays an area that isn't that gray. And to your point, Jason, like PSP is a large driver through a lot of this data stuff, and that is it's almost, it's like a fourth type of thing. It's like the risk of your of under maintaining your distribution system is both not, you know, a failure of component, it is preventing failure of components causing problems. So there's a bunch of really wonky technical things going on here that that comes across in. And I did want to ask you, Russ, did you watch John Oliver's segment on last week tonight where he talked about the grid? And how would you compare this article to that?
Oh, I didn't watch it.
You didn't watch it?
I'm a Paul Dockery failure at this point.
Yeah, holy cow. It's good. I enjoyed it. But I put them into the same camps of like, they're what mainstream people will consume, so we need to be aware of them. And the Wall Street Journal article, mainstream people will consume it, and we should be aware of what is.
Yeah, and I think that you know the EIA data or whatever, like the safety data, like whatever they're using, it's getting worse. I wonder in comparison to what, right? And so we just talked about broadband, right? And I assume, you know, maybe I'm being naive, but I figure 15 years from now, stuff like that's going to seem old, right? Like wherever you are,
broadband's going to seem old.
There's a good chance you'll have really dependable access to broadband, right? And so as compared to the last 30 years, like I couldn't imagine that things weren't getting worse, but like I said, on the supply side, you have these really salient events, Texas.
Salient, good word.
And then, you know, California summer 2020, right?
Yep.
And so those are just supply side events. They're usually exacerbated by some sort of severe climate change, like whether it's wildfire, cutting off access, or you know, people's lack of winterization of their plant like finally coming to bite them in the rear, right? But a lot of these, I think, are because of a lack of just dependability of the delivery assets and the lack of redundancy, right?
Yeah.
Which I think another issue is an unwillingness to sort of invest in infrastructure. And I think also part of that is because I think that I worry that we're not getting as much for our dollar as we used to, right? And so it used to be easier to build things out. And this will be dangerous because I don't remember the source of this or anything, but
unattributed quote.
I read an article about how generally with infrastructure, and I think the focus of this was largely on like the New York subway costs, and then also the California high-speed rail costs as compared, I think you would expect that in China or East, like not necessarily just East Asia, but like through large parts of China, given the way that their government operates and commanding and controlling, they're able to get more like track, like mile per dollar, or they can build a subway system for cheaper than we can here. But compared to Europe and Western Europe as well, like the whatever the numbers they had, like were pretty astounding about how much it costs in America to build something. And I think that's an issue as well, because I think a lot of this is you need a different electric grid in some ways, right? And it's going to be tough to build that.
Yeah, I listened to an unnamed podcast that we may have both listened to the same one, and it covered this topic extensively, and used the article that you were talking about.
Yeah, so I feel even more confident quoting it then. I'm going to go back and get more detailed about quoting it in probably a minute or so.
Okay. Yeah, what do you think, Jason?
Well, one elephant in the room that you don't hear a lot about is, California is building massive amounts of backup diesel, mostly for data centers. I think we're at maybe 12 gigawatts now. And that's counterproductive for the environment. It's counterproductive for everything. One article I did, we're at 15% of the total capacity of the grid equivalent in diesel generation. So yeah, all of it to power data centers mostly, and these are in disadvantaged areas. So, and a lot of times these emissions don't get counted for whatever California's taking credit for on the clean energy front. But yeah, I think that's worth a mention too.
So yeah, so data center load and crypto load and stuff is worth talking about. But I've also like had a pause when I've heard that brought up as evidence of sort of kind of hypocrisy in California, because I worry that we do the opposite, which is I think we should be concerned about carbon output, right? Or GHG output, right? Like including
emissions output, including all the other emissions, right? Yeah.
Which like we should be really thoughtful and careful about things like backup diesel generation. But if they run so little and provide a reliability benefit, like I'd like to, sure. I just want us to worry about like what the actual emissions are on those things. Cause I'm personally someone who thinks that there's going to be a role for fast start thermal in the way the grid's going to operate in the future, irrespective of batteries and stuff like that. And I think we should be really thoughtful about how we do that, but I like an emissions based discussion instead of just like an installed capacity discussion.
Yeah. So to your point, Jason, we should be tracking those emissions, right?
Yeah, it's we've tried to get data on how often the backup generators run. It's really difficult.
You need to know. Yeah, you have to have that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But we're running out of time. We got a bunch more.
Yeah, and I've got a kid using the internet watching TV that I gotta go take care of before too long. So
okay.
All right. So I'd love a typewriter sound right now to signpost the next story.
You do great work, Ludgie. Thank you.
Thank you
Sounds
very
good.
much, Ludgie. PG&E Corp, the parent of Pacific Gas and Electric, discussed its year-end financial results on a February 10th earnings call that made news with its price tag to underground 10,000 miles of power lines in high fire risk areas. PG&E estimates it will cost more than $25 billion, which converts to approximately $2.5 million per mile of underground transmission. This is a divergence from a 2017 white paper PG posted on its PGE Currents blog that estimated about $3 million per mile. The utility expects to be installing 175 miles of underground cable in 2022 and 1,200 miles a year underground by 2026. You can find coverage of the earnings call in both the Sacramento Bee, with coverage by Dale Kasler, and California Energy Markets, with coverage by Roderick Hurdle Branford. And so, yeah, Jason, others, what do you guys think of this story? I think it's very much apropos of what we were just talking about, right?
Yeah, PG&E's been kind of nebulous on this. Patty Poppy came out and said, we're going to do this. Then you didn't hear much until now. But it was interesting to see the focus on that. It's, you know, it's going to have to happen, I think, in high fire risk areas. It is crazy expensive, but happy to see more movement on it. And, you know, just start in the high risk fire areas, go from there. And I think the cost is at least $1 million per mile. It was $1 million per mile at one point, but when you look at the cost of these wildfires, of course, there's a good trade-off there. And you know, they did a little better financially in 2021, $102 million loss compared to the $1.3 billion loss in 2020. You know, PG&E can be kind of a car wreck in progress, but you know, I think the new CEO is doing her best to get a handle on things. You know, we'll see.
Yeah, and the write-up that you had in California Energy Markets, Jason, it does say a rundown of the different, you know, the causes for loss, and they must have talked about it on their earnings call. And it is interesting to go through that rundown, which is, you know, last year they had a $1.3 billion loss, and they talked to what is it, like $2.2 billion of non-core items in their 2021 GAAP earnings that include things like payments for the bankruptcy case, the 2019-2020 wildfire-related costs, investigations, you know, and you kind of think through, oh, it's a big number. The $25 billion is a big number for underground. But if you think of all of these payouts because of wildfires, you know, it is not infeasible. You could see some real benefit of that $25 billion in actual, you know, output, throughput.
Sure.
Yeah, and it's good to see the numbers coming down, and it'd be great if they could find a way to make them even smaller, right?
Yeah. What do you think, Russ, about the possibility for technological improvements on like undergrounding transmission cable and in economies of scale? What do you think there's something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would assume that if it was known that every utility that has high voltage lines in general, but especially high voltage lines, or infrastructure that goes through these really dry areas, and the really dry areas are increasing, God, I would think that somebody's going to come up with solutions that make it easier. Now, I think that there are technological solutions that can make it easier. I wonder, I didn't dig too deep into that article, but I wonder how much they're forecasting for sort of regulatory costs or like difficulty. It seems like they've got a pretty good mandate to get this done in California.
In one of the articles, I think it was the Sacramento Bee article, they do note that they do expect these costs to be recovered through rates. Is that your question, Russ?
Well, no, more about siting and access and like environmental impacts, etc.
Yeah. To go to your prior point about the infrastructure, the cost to do infrastructure in California versus
and that's where I think, just from a public policy perspective, we don't all here. I think in California, I would guess they've got a pretty clear mandate, right?
Interesting. Okay.
And so most of the public policy is kind of rowing in the same direction, and so it costs what it costs, right? But if it were to, because if you need that value like electricity, then then it costs what it costs, and you try to get the cost down. But I think that I would worry about this getting. I think one of the barriers of this being really broadly adopted outside of California is it's a lot of work. Like it ultimately seems less invasive, but the process of doing it is pretty invasive, and you're going to be over just a ton of jurisdictions and bring in a lot of other people. And I think that having, so Russ Mantifel says we should have a societal discussion about whether or not we should do that, and why can't we just do it? And the reasons that it's difficult, everybody knows. But I think that that's a big barrier that makes it tough to kind of handicap how much of a signal this would be for whether it's going to happen for other utilities, and have the sort of scale that helps decrease the cost.
Yeah, I'm really curious on that scale question. I don't see it, but I'm open to being corrected. Love the typewriter. Thank you, Ludgie. I think this is mine, right? I'm the last one?
Yep.
Okay. Dan Catchpole covered the pre-publication version of the 2021 Power Plan approved at the Northwest Power and Conservation Council's February 16th meeting. Breaking news. Ludgie, do you have the breaking news, the soundbite that we got last episode?
Hey, you, get over here.
Breaking news! The most controversial elements in the draft plan released last fall are in the pre-publication final version, which was unanimously approved by the council. The plan now goes to an ad hoc council committee with staff who will edit it for clarity and readability, but will not change the substance. Council staff expects to publish the plan in March. With the West increasingly turning to zero carbon emitting resources, the plan forecasts 237 gigawatts of new resources by 2030 across the Western Electricity Coordinating Council region and 401 gigawatts by 2041. The 2030 total includes nearly 15 gigawatts of new natural gas, which increases to 16.5 by 2041. Decarbonization and rapid expansion of renewables epitomize how difficult the future is compared to the past, Northwest Power and Conservation Council's power planning director, Ben Kujola, said in an interview. Quote, one big distinction between this and previous plans is previous plans had one answer that covered about 90% of possible scenarios. This plan isn't like that, Ben said. The industry's existing models are designed for a world that increasingly is in the past, and new, more nuanced models are needed, he said. To that end, staff rebuilt the council's Genesis model. The new version produced surprising and controversial results, including slashing projected energy efficiency investments and a dramatic drop in the likelihood of power supply shortfalls, forcing load shedding or blackouts. Thanks to Clearing Up's contributing editor and the Underground's other podcast ambassador, Dan Catchpole, for reading through the report. We'll put a link to the article in the show notes. Please show him some love, follow him on Twitter, and, just send him a thank you. Always appreciated.
Yep, Dan's doing good work. As far as gas, it's not going anywhere in California. It's still part of the CPUC planning. You probably know California recently reduced its greenhouse gas emissions target to 38 million metric tons, will require more than 25,000 megawatts of clean energy and 15,000 megawatts of energy storage and demand response. And then, of course, the Western grid becoming increasingly interlocked and, more interchangeability, or how should I say it, more dependence on each other. It'll be a bigger issue. And in California, they're planning on keeping natural gas online through 2045. So just kind of shows, gas is still part of the mix here. And then that's, with the new, especially with this new target. So some interesting developments there.
Hey, do you have anything on this, Russ, that you thought was noteworthy?
To what Jason was saying, I I think that's a conversation that all of the various entities need to have is about the role of thermal in this, and or possibly nuclear moving forward. And that's where, like I said, for myself, I think that focusing on emissions versus installed capacity is going to be the most helpful way to kind of meet our goals while maintaining this energy like reliability and security that we're used to. And then yeah, I think that I haven't been super involved in it, but I'd be interested to see how this plays out with the Genesis model outcomes, right? It's great that I'm glad that we're working on different ways of trying to model this stuff when there's so much more uncertainty. I know that the outputs were not what a lot of people were expecting, and what maybe the other people working on resource adequacy, for example, had seen in their work. And I'm excited. I'm interested to see how that plays out, right? Because I think that you need to get roughly on the same page about what the lay of the land is, and so I'm curious how people are going to handle the way Genesis works now, the assumptions, and what to do with the outcomes of running that model.
Yeah, to your point, Russ, it was some of the outputs were unexpected, and I think a lot of the work in probably the narrative write-up is trying to make sure that there is good context for how to use those results. Because I do think when they present and talk to it, they do try to articulate how to use the results, but making sure that comes through in the plan. PNUC did some really good presentations around how unexpected the outputs were. And I, of course, our friends at PNUC who may or may not listen to this, I would celebrate their work and point you towards them for maybe some of Tomas's old analysis that I thought was incredibly compelling. I know Crystal Ball probably has that in a desk drawer somewhere that she would be happy to send you.
Which, I mean, talking about those differences is great, right? I mean, it's not like their computers work differently, or they've got an evil robot, or like they've got a better robot or a worse robot. I mean, it's about the assumptions you make and the functions that you're assuming are going to be, happening based on those, that you get this model. And so hopefully everybody just really engages on talking about how people are coming up with these really drastically different outcomes, and so we can work on what to do next.
Yep. Okay. Let's move it.
Okay. Well, that's it with those stories. Let's hit the typewriter, please, and move on. Thank you, Ludgie. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we have a preview of Matt and Paul's interview with PGP's new executive director, Mary Wiencke. Take it away, Paul.
At Northwest Public Power Association, give me the website, Ludgie. Public power is life. For 82 years, NWPPA has supported public power utilities and other associates in the greater Pacific Northwest by offering education, training, communications, government relations, and services like RFP and job postings. The job postings is probably their most hit website, I'm just guessing. In addition to public power, what else is important to NWPPA? Local control, member needs, integrity, and quality products and services. Today, NWPPA proudly serves 155 member utilities and more than 325 utility industry associate members. Learn more or register for a class at nwppa.org. On your screen right now, that's nwppa.org, where public power is life.
Today, Paul and I are joined by Mary Wiencke, the new executive director for PGP, or the Public Generating Pool, who generously agreed to lend her considerable expertise to a number of market topics and questions. Mary joined PGP in January after spending about 14 years holding positions of increasing responsibility and importance at PacifiCorp. Do you say PacifiCorp or PacifiCorp?
PacifiCorp.
All right, good. The other one is wrong. Most recently, Mary was PacifiCorp's Vice President of Transmission Regulation and Market Policy.
Mary is a graduate of Barnard College. Is it Barnard or Barnard?
Barnard.
Barnard College and Lewis and Clark Law School. She began her career at Pacific Core as an attorney and succeeds Friend of the Underground and Northwest Public Power icon Therese Hampton as PGP's executive director. It's so good to have you, Mary. I'm very happy that you agreed to join us.
So great to have you.
Inviting me.
And again, welcome to Public Power Underground. You got more history and context, Mary, on market development than just about anybody in the region, from multiple perspectives as well. You were at Pacificor when they were the first entrance into the EIM from outside of the CAISO, and also when they were considering PTO or becoming a participating transmission owner. So given your level of expertise on markets overall and market development, what do you think we should be paying attention to as the region continues to evaluate market expansion? And kind of throw in a follow-up question here, which may very well be more important, at least from my perspective, is what is interesting to you about this at this point?
So obviously, really couple of loaded questions.
No apologies.
And I think people should be really paying attention to the places where they know that kind of the fault lines have occurred in the past. And I know that you guys, Paul told me that Therese and Steve came on already to talk about the PGP market retrospective.
Some great work done by PGP.
Yes, it's on our website in case anybody wants to read it or learn more. Feel free to contact us.
We'll link to it in notes.
Yeah, we'll link to it in the show notes. Yep.
Yeah. But I think if you look across, this isn't our first rodeo in the West, and in addition, this isn't the first rodeo across the country. So I think really taking lessons from history and looking at kind of where we know the fault lines are and where we know the challenges are, and thinking through, okay, how can we navigate through this time? And so I think that's what people should be keeping an eye on as we go through these conversations, and not getting sort of too stuck on the outcome or the end state. I think there's a certain key set of objectives and a certain fault lines that have happened in the past. And we need to work through those things sort of regardless in what context or in what form kind of the market develops. So I think we kind of keep an open mind to a certain extent on what that end state looks like, but really kind of focus on, like I say, where we know the kind of touch points are from our past. That said, I also think that there's differences now, and so people should also be focusing on what those differences are. And that kind of gets to your second question about sort of what is really interesting to me, because I think one of the key aspects of that's different now from those other efforts is the manner in which state energy policy has evolved since those efforts. And I think Washington is a really prime example of that. And so you have markets developing in the context of state policies that are really driving decarbonization and driving a more sort of granular understanding of sort of how states are being served and by which resources. And so I think to me, that's this sort of intersection of state policy and market development is super fascinating, because you can have state policies whose objectives are ultimately the same as some of the market objectives in terms of integrating renewables and those sorts of things. But you could actually have the sort of implementation of the policy and the implementation of the market sort of at cross purposes a little bit. So I think it's just super fascinating. It's super complex. That's what I really, I'm super interested in. I'd love to kind of get into the nitty gritty there. And I think if we can kind of resolve some of those challenging issues on that intersection, I do think that we'll sort of find a path forward. So I don't know, that was kind of a long-winded answer to your question. But that was actually one of the reasons that was really attracted me to PGP, is that PGP is really engaged on both carbon policy and market policy. And there's a really interesting intersection there that not everybody gets to kind of have the chance and opportunity to work on both. So very interesting times.
I'm going to ask what is probably a naive question, but I can because I'm here. There is also, you talk about state policies and then the market policies overlapping and that intersection. I think that's a really interesting touch point. There's also seems to be a trend where the state policy is explicitly market, like joining a market. Do you think that's a trend that is likely to continue? And off the top of my head, Colorado, I think that is a state policy now that those utilities are asked to join a market. Do you think that'll continue? And do you think that's going to be a trend out here? And am I missing something that's so obvious? I miss a lot of obvious things, Mary. I'm not an expert. I'm an enthusiast. These are different things.
I appreciate your enthusiasm. Yeah, both Nevada and Colorado have statutes in place that require the utilities to join an RTO by, I believe, 2030. There's some off ramps. It's not sort of a mandatory no matter what sort of requirement, but I do think we could see more conversations about that in states across the West, as people see RTOs as kind of and moving in that direction as kind of a tool to achieve other state energy policies. And so I do think we'll probably see more conversation on that. I don't have any more insight though as to sort of specifics on where and when.
Yeah, well, I just appreciate the Nevada was one that I had forgotten. I'm going to go to another area of topic. Unless Matt, you want to ask a follow-up on that one?
I did, and the pause there was intentional, just in case we have to cut this, and Mary doesn't want to answer it. But one of the things that is especially interesting to me is with respect to what Paul just brought up, and state legislation geared toward mandating certain action with regard to market development. And thinking back to some of the recent efforts in the Western Resource Adequacy Program and the issues with regard to state PUCs and their frustration around 205 filing rights and an inability to control the program or take a greater role with respect to governance within the program itself. I'd be interested to hear if you had any thoughts around whether those types of actions at the state level, the legislation in particular, would be counterproductive, given those entities like eWeb that really do value local control, but also are extremely in favor of more of a move towards more organized markets, but at the same time, not necessarily interested in seeing state PUC control over how we participate in those markets. And so there's a disconnect there.
There is, right? And I mean, it is a little bit odd because state jurisdiction doesn't extend to the wholesale energy market and wholesale transmission. So it is sort of this odd kind of juxtaposition of the state seeing joining an RTO as sort of a tool to meet its other state policies and find efficiencies and things like that. But the tool itself is not really a state tool. So I don't know. I mean, I think that the question that I would ask has to do with whether or not that's really the most effective way to encourage an RTO in the West through state policy. I mean, I kind of feel like there's numerous ways to approach state policy. One is to say, thou shalt join an RTO. Another way might be to put policies in place that encourage RTO development or participation without kind of being such a such a direct type policy would kind of be how I would think about it.
Thanks, Paul and Matt and Mary, for coming on to talk and that great interview. Subscribe to Public Power Underground and make sure you don't miss the bonus episode next week, which includes a lot of talk about markets, book clubs, and another intermission game. Next up, we're TLDRing our way through the news in a segment we're calling Sound Bites, thanks to the original 5-star reviewer and commenter, Ben Ulrich.
So I got a note from Ben. He sent along a screenshot of his 5-star review. Thank you, Ben. He also wanted everyone to know that he is too lazy to read anything in his news feed, so he lets us curate the news for him. His tag for the segment is a segment where we TLDR our way through the news and give you sound bites so you can decide if you want to read more. Thanks for the name, Ben. And it's work to watch. And a little nervous that you're allowing us to curate your news, but I'm not nervous if you let News Data curate your news.
That's our business.
That is News Data's business.
And I just want everybody to know that for the TLDR segment, if you don't read this, just know that if you had read these articles, they probably would reinforce what you already think. So be confident.
Exactly. That's exactly what we look for here.
Like any good news story, right?
Like any good news story.
Are you ready, Russ?
I think I'm ready.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm ready. We'll find out.
Okay. This is Sound Bites, a segment where we TLDR our way through the news and give you the sound bites so you can decide if you want to read more. I'm Paul Dockery.
And I'm Russ Mantifel.
And we're curating the sound bites.
Really?
In fish news, biologists from 3 agencies report that the number of northern pike in Lake Roosevelt is diminishing, especially in the lower part of the 150-mile-long reservoir closest to Grand Coulee Dam.
The downward population trend is confirmed across different methods being used to monitor and eradicate the invasive species. It's especially good news for a coalition of agencies trying to prevent the voracious predator fish from migrating to the Columbia River's anadromous zone, where they could prey on juvenile salmon, steelhead, listed under the Endangered Species Act.
The anadromous zone. We need a segment called the anadromous zone. What is this? Did we just name this segment for next week? Are we going to call this segment the anadromous zone? I don't know.
We didn't do that.
It all fits, but I love that name. I had no idea it was a thing. A big hydroelectric basin, decades of conservation and clean energy policies on the books push Northwest states to near the top of a national ranking of state electric utility performances based on affordability, reliability, and environmental responsibility.
The study, Electric Utility Performance, a state-by-state data review conducted by the Citizens Utility Board of Illinois, ranked Washington, Idaho, and Oregon in the top 5 of overall utility performance, with Montana coming in at 14th. And as you've probably heard earlier in this episode, Jason does not live in one of those states.
He does not.
Nope.
The Northwest Power and Conservation Council is considering undertaking an exhaustive analysis of what removing the lower Snake River dams could mean for the Northwest energy system.
Wading into the political issue could put the nonpartisan council in an awkward position. Council members acknowledged this while discussing the topic during their February 16th meeting.
An analysis by the council would only consider the dams as energy resources. It would be limited to looking at how removing the dams could affect the Columbia River's hydropower system and the regional power grid's flexibility and reliability, and what replacement resources would be needed. The study would not look at potential effects on fish and wildlife, the dam's economic viability, or any other issues outside the regional power system. It's a constrained analysis. It looks like there's obviously a study in clearing up about it this week.
Next, news from the Potomac. A divided FERC approved 2 statements on February 17th advising policies for considering proposed natural gas infrastructure with expanded consideration of economic and environmental impacts, including greenhouse gas emissions.
FERC adopted an interim GHG policy statement specifying that proposed projects with GHG emissions of 100,000 metric tons annually or higher would trigger an environmental impact statement. FERC said that in quantifying emissions, it would include construction and operating emissions, and it may include, quote, may include emissions from upstream production and downstream consumption.
FERC also updated its 1999 policy statement on certifying new interstate pipelines and other facilities.
The 1999 statement relied on precedent agreements between developers and shippers to establish project need. Under the revised statement, the Commission may consider other evidence of need, including demand projections, capacity utilization rates, potential cost saving to customers, regional assessments, and statements from state regulators or local utilities, FERC said.
Turtle Rock Irrigation District is moving forward on a 5 megawatt pilot project to install solar panels over canals, which could provide energy while protecting water from evaporation. I grew up in central Arizona, and this is what we would call a classic twofer. They were recently awarded a $20 million state grant for the project.
Finally, California energy officials this week approved more than $10 billion in grants for projects that will advance electric vehicle charging technology and build cleaner alternatives to diesel-fired mobile generators.
$2 million is provided to help standardize charging equipment and coordinate charging to occur at off-peak times. The grant award says, currently, charging connectors do not have a solid market for grid integration. The market is split between proprietary and public charging solutions, the grant says.
The California Energy Commission, or CEC, also approved $1.2 million to test a solar plus storage system that's supposed to be less expensive than alternatives.
About $2.7 million is earmarked to develop a method to harvest heat from California's geothermal fields without extracting waters.
Interesting. And $3 million is provided to build a mobile generator that uses hydrogen fuel cells and batteries rather than fossil fuels.
Heat harvester could be a segment as well in the future.
Oh, heat harvester, nice. The hot takes, heat harvester.
Nice.
Oh, this is great stuff.
Thanks to Public Power Underground's production partners at News Data for letting us use their leads, and thanks to Ian for compiling them. Now back to the crew for to close out the episode.
That's our curation of the. You're leaving me hanging here. Ready?
Oh,
you ready, Russ? You're leaving me hanging. We're doing it.
This is going really well. Okay,
you moved on. That's our curation of the sound bites.
Sound bites. That sounded not at all like we were trying to find out what the other person was going to say. So
yeah, no, I think the Anadromous zone. I don't know if it at all works with the TLDR segment, but it's such a good name.
Yeah.
Okay, we're ready.
Great. I guess before we head out, any of those stories you want to dig into deeper, folks, or?
I find the Snake River Dam removal analysis by the council, it doesn't make it to the full like regular public power desktop because it's just an announcement of the study, but I think it's good that they're working on something. Curious what your take, are you allowed to have a take on that, Russ?
I don't have a take on it. I'm just going to let you know that right now.
Okay.
What I will say is I have a meta take. I've harvested heat from multiple stories, and I'm going to turn it into a meta hot take.
So we're going to the metaverse with Facebook?
Which is that with that and the FERC topic, going back to my theme of understanding as, you know, as a bunch of different folks, like what are we trying to achieve? Like what is our main objective? Like there's no easy answers. And so I think there's a couple of different stories about how, you know, if you're in a zero-sum game, you got to find a way to just figure out what are we going to try to accomplish. So let's all just do that.
Yeah. Anything you had, Jason, that you found interesting in that rundown?
Yeah, you know, I've been covering FERC for a long time. It's been interesting seeing them move in this direction. There's a lot of questions about their legal authority as far as greenhouse gas emissions. One comment I read from Joseph Kelleher, who's the former chairman of FERC, you know, under a Republican, said he doesn't think FERC has legal authority to do this. I think you'll see it going to court and a long, complicated, you know, proceeding on that. But yeah, the public interest standard, according to Kelleher, is fairly narrow. So they're definitely pushing the limits, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, continued fight on the horizon.
Oh, yeah.
I just inserted at the very last minute the article about the solar over irrigation canals, the twofer, as Russ called it. I find that like I like to have hopeful stories in here, and while it's probably more capital intensive to do that type of stuff, I hope there is some economic case because it probably is good use of like land. It's good land use.
It
and
feels
also,
like a no-brainer forehead slapper. I mean, I guess I don't know how much area that includes, but I suspect the area is going to be a product of the length and the width of those canals is my other hot take on that.
That's a hot take on that one.
Yeah.
I will say, Jason, Gizmodo, I found this story first in Gizmodo because they have a way hotter take and like a way more clickable title. I think maybe you need to work on like the title on this one for News Data was,
All right.
I guess, yeah. Is the trouble bringing the power back to load? I mean, I'm trying to find out.
It's a capital cost. It's more expensive to install these on irrigation canals, right? That's the like you have to pay more for the frames, right? That's why you don't just do this all the time. It's more expensive, and
I like the fact that it really cuts down on water evaporation, so that's a great side benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, we got to get out of here. We're way past time.
We've been doing this a lot. Okay, let's move on here. So, that's all the news we're covering this week. The bonus episode with the full interview with Mary Wiencke will be published March 3rd. The next regularly scheduled episode will be recorded March 14th and published on the 17th. To make sure you don't miss it, you can sign up for an unintrusive newsletter with links to all the ways to consume this fascinating content at publicpowerunderground.substack.com. Otherwise, you can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, or your favorite podcast app.
Russ, you did a great job. Great cold open. A wonderful job hosting us. Do you feel valued and appreciated?
I do. Yeah, it feels pretty good. Yeah, I wasn't expecting it, but you know what? Like, I feel pretty good about this.
Good. How about you, Jason? Do you feel valued and appreciated here?
I do, even with my technical problems. Sorry about that, but I'll make sure next week to get that camera fixed.
Thanks for trudging through.
Yeah. Ludgie, turn your video on. Do you feel valued and appreciated, Ludgie? You glad to be here? Good.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Yes, great to have you.
As always, send any news, questions, opinions, corrections, or complaints to Paul on Twitter at a power manager, or if you're a friend of the Underground, you can send any of us a note. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data's weekly newsletters to get this podcast, but it sure makes the podcast makes a lot more sense. Thanks all for this week, and thanks for tuning in.
Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on. We're likely.
Public Power Underground is a production of Klatskin IPUD and News Data. The views expressed here are own and not the official views of Klatskin IPUD, News Data, or the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. That means those were Russ's opinions, not BPA's. Just to underscore that fact, right, Russ? Yeah, he's nodding his head. Public Power Underground is public power and public power adjacent news from a power department's perspective. The alliteration coming through, Russ is right. That is the highest form. We don't like our puns. We like our alliterations. It's written and directed by Klatskin IPUD's Power Department, led by me, Paul Dockery, and it's edited and published by the stellar team at Pioneer Utility Resources, led by associate producer Sarah Wooden. Our theme song, Roll On Enthusiast, was rewritten, performed, and recorded by Arin Guillory and Ian Bledsoe. Special thanks to our celebrity guest host, Russ Mantifel, for participating in this week's episode. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch!